Morning, guys. Morning, Bailey. Morning, Heldy. I mean, Heldy, come on. You knew this was going to be the topic today. We're taking a break from the positional rankings. It's the biggest story in the NFL right now. There's a lot of stuff to get into here. The Athletic just wrote a story yesterday interviewing players about the policy that I think further emphasizes the problem that the NFL has. And it's TDN Daily. We discuss news and notes. That's what we do here on the show. It's not against you. It's not against the Colts. You gotta take the news and you gotta talk about it. I'm sorry that you're upset, but it's not a targeted attack against you. We just got to discuss the news here on the show, and you just so happen to be a fan of the team that we're gonna talk about today. So I got to send out the tweet here. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about Isaiah Rodgers, and then we're gonna discuss. And I don't know how many people saw this, but just yesterday, the Athletic put together a very long story about NFL players, commenting anonymously about the gambling policy and suspensions. Um, and this story, I believe, based on it was written yesterday, but I'm reading the beginning of the story. There was no mention of the investigation into Isaiah Rodgers, so this was written before that story came out. So pretty telling that they were writing the story ahead of that information becoming public. So we'll talk about that as well. I just need to send out the tweet, so I'm gonna go on mute for a second, and then we can get the show on the road. All right, tweet sent. We are all good to go. Bailey asking in the pre-show. I wonder how many more players will get caught before the season starts. I mean, there was a. We'll talk about this during the show, but there was a player I saw. I'm going to try to get the actual quote here for the show. I have the ESPN story and the Athletic story up, and I'm just going to get to our NFL because I saw the quote there this morning. Let me see if I can find it. I'll read it here for the pre-show, and we'll read it again during the show. Agents said they've heard from players confessing that they violated the gambling policy. Quote, I have a player who said, I bet from the facility $3 to $5 bets on other sports. What do I do? The agent said, quote, don't volunteer anything, but if somebody asks you, be honest, they likely have evidence. Like, that's where we're at right now with this. And so it's going to be interesting, but let's get into the show and we can discuss it more in depth, and we can get your thoughts into the show as well. So I'll transition to this screen here. I don't think we're going to need the big screen today here on the show for anything because we're not doing any positional rankings, but we will get this show on the road. And welcome in to the Tuesday edition of the TDN Daily podcast. Chris Schubert back with you here once again on the show. Hope everybody is having a great start to their Tuesday. We're back into the news format here today with a pretty major story that developed yesterday in the National Football League, or has been developing over the last couple of weeks and months in the National Football League, and it took another turn yesterday, and that being about the NFL's gambling policy and players being caught under said gambling policy. So we will discuss the latest, the NFL investigating apparently Colts corner Isaiah Rodgers. We will discuss an Athletic story that just came out discussing players anonymously talking about the gambling policy and whether or not the NFL has a sports betting problem, a sports betting issue on their hands. At first, let's talk about the news at hand and what has brought us here to this being the topic here today. We learned yesterday that the NFL is investigating Isaiah Rodgers for potential violations of the league gambling policy. The team acknowledged the inquiry on Monday in a statement, but they did not name Rodgers. They said that they were aware of the NFL's investigation and will have no further comment at this time. Rodgers then came out with a statement, quote, I know I have made mistakes and I am willing to do whatever it takes to repair the situation. The last thing I ever wanted to do was be a distraction to the Colts organization, my coaches, and my teammates. I've let people down that I care about. I made an error in judgment, and I'm going to work hard to make sure that those mistakes are rectified through this process. It's an honor to play in the NFL, and I have never taken that lightly. I am very sorry for all of this, end quote. So that Isaiah Rodgers' statement. And here's some of the information from the ESPN story about what is being investigated. The sportsbook account apparently opened under the name of an associate of Rodgers. approximately 100 bets placed on the account over an undisclosed amount of time. And this is the problem. This is the issue that is probably got the NFL looking at this. It was including Colts games, according to the sources. Most of the bets were in the $25 to $50 range, although there was at least one low four-figure bet. And this is a guy that started 9 games in 2022, was probably going to be a starter this season. There was a report earlier in the day that there was an investigation into a Colts player betting, including wagers on his own team. And then this kind of connected the dots to this. And look, the NFL has shown they've got this policy in place. Under no circumstances can you bet on NFL games. You can bet on other sports, just not at the team facility. And so far what we've seen Calvin Ridley get a 1-year suspension for, while not playing, betting on Falcons games. Got a suspension for a year, even though he wasn't playing. And then we just saw this past offseason, Jamison Williams, Stanley Berryhill, and a couple of other players suspended for 6 games. And again, that was betting on other sports while on team property. And so that is the parameters that we have had of where you bet on your own team, you weren't around, that's 1 year. You bet on other sports while at the team facility. Betting at the team facility in any capacity is a no-no. That got Jamison Williams and Stanley Berryhill 6 games. There were 4 Lions players that got caught up in that suspension. And the thing that I immediately get drawn to here, guys, and it's going to be a cross-sport comparison, but it's the first thing that I think of when I see stories like this, is you have a league here in the NFL that is taking, millions of dollars from these sports betting companies. You've got stadium deals for teams in which sports books are being put inside these stadiums. You have stadiums themselves being named after these sports books. So the NFL, from just their perspective, and we will get into the entirety of this conversation here in just a second, but just from the NFL's perspective, if they're going to take millions of dollars from these sports betting places, if these sports betting venues are going to put sports books inside their venues, inside these stadiums, and you're going to have stadiums named after these sports betting ventures, you need complete transparency, and you need people to feel that there is nothing that is, but there's any potential mishappenings going on. Everything needs to be on the up and up. Everything needs to pass, a quality control check and appear to be above board, right? That's what the NFL needs to strive for when they're taking millions of dollars. If there is any semblance of impropriety, that's a problem for the NFL, right? And so that is why they have their policy in place, and that is why they hand down these punishments. Calvin Ridley got suspended for a year with a policy in place for betting on he bet on the Falcons, even though he wasn't playing at the time. He was hurt and he was away from the team. Jamison Williams got suspended for 6 games for betting on another sport while at the team facility. I think of Pete Rose being the manager of the Cincinnati Reds and Major League Baseball not having any gambling dollars being infused into their budget, being infused into their profit and loss statements. I think of him being the manager of the team, not an actual player for the team. I think of him betting on his team to win games, never betting on his team to lose games, potentially putting out there the idea that he threw games. And Major League Baseball suspended Pete Rose for life. Pete Rose, with all the context that I just gave you, that Major League Baseball was not taking any gambling dollars at that time. He was a manager. He was, betting on his team to win. All that stuff got suspended for life. Still suspended for life. If Isaiah Rodgers, while an active member of the team who played 9 games last year, is found to have been betting on Colts games, I don't see a scenario where Isaiah Rodgers plays football ever again. The NFL is going to want to send a clear message, and I see a lot of conversation currently going on in the live YouTube chat, and I greatly appreciate all of the banter that we're having. There's a separate conversation that we can have about the policy itself and the enforcement of said policy from the NFL, the NFLPA, and the player's perspective, and we will get into that. But just looking at this from what we do know and what we know the punishments will be, I don't know how Isaiah Rodgers isn't immediately put on the commissioner's exempt list, and it's a long time before he comes back. If these allegations are proven to be true, that he was betting on Colts games. If you're an active player betting on Colts games, I do not see a scenario in which you are playing football for the foreseeable future, if ever again. That's going to be a tough thing for the NFL to welcome that player back into the fold. Now, this is the first time they're going to be confronted with something that could be to this magnitude, and we'll see how they handle it. Now, that's the news, and that's what I think will happen here. But let's talk about the NFL gambling policy as a whole, and we'll weave in some of these comments. And Heldy, who is our resident Colts fan in the chat, says, outside of my clear bias, I will never take the NFL sides on this. Taking millions of dollars from sportsbooks should and will open you up for this kind of thing. So, yes, they're taking money from the sportsbooks, and it's going to put them in this awkward position where they're going to have these punishments. But it's not as if the gambling policy is this obscure piece of legislation in the CBA, in the rulebook, that people can't find. It's very well known what the punishments are. And so for me, the failure on this, and Heldy, I agree with you that I'm not going to take the NFL sides on this. This is a failure of NFL leadership. This is failure of NFLPA leadership. This is failure of team leaderships from all 32 teams across the National Football League. If this is such a big deal for the NFL, then this needs to be a priority every single offseason. You send an NFL representative, you send an NFLPA representative, and those two sides work hand in hand to put on workshops, to put on Q&A sessions, to put on all sorts of different things where they can clearly every single year outline what this policy is, what you can do, what you can't do, what the punishments will be, what the punishments won't be. And that to me is the failure here. It is the failure of leadership from the NFL, from the PA, and from the teams themselves. And do you want to know how I know this is the failure? And you're going to see me looking off the screen here because I have a story that I want to reference. The Athletic just dropped a story yesterday about, they talked to 5 different players who anonymously discussed, their thoughts on the gambling policy. Before I get into some of the meaty stuff on this, I'm going to read you some of the quotes just at the top of the story from some of these players. Quote, I had no idea, said a free agent with 7 years of experience, with 7 years of NFL experience. Quote, I don't think any player knows about that. That's so specific. If players know about that, kudos to them, in reference to the fact that you could not place mobile bets on other sports while at work. This is another quote. Quote, I thought that you couldn't bet on anything during the NFL season, end quote, said a 9-year NFL vet. Quote, I didn't really look into it beyond that, end quote. This is another quote. Quote, I don't even know what the rule is or when the rule changed or the fine print on when you can or can't gamble on, end quote, said a 10-year veteran. You have players who have been in the league for a very, very long time. You've got 7, 9, 10-year vets saying they don't know what the rules are. Now, is that their fault? Yeah, they should probably talk to their agents. They should probably talk to their PA reps on their teams and try to get an understanding on this if they're so concerned about it. Now, if there's somebody who's never going to consume sports betting and they're never even going to think about doing it while at the building, then they don't need to know these rules. But you've got players who have no idea what these rules are. To me, that is a lack of leadership from the NFL, from the PA, and from the teams themselves. That's the problem that I have with this. You got multiple players, anonymous, so they're not putting their names to it, but basically saying, I don't know what the rules are. And if somebody does know the rules, good for them. Sean says, what is the deal with betting at team facilities? I do not understand what the problem with that is. What is the NFL's reasoning? Now, that's a separate conversation. Now, I think we can get into this, the ticky-tack nature of the idea of if a player bets on, probably not a great thing to invoke here because it's in the news, but I see it in the story here because they're talking about golf. If they bet on the PGA Tour, right? While they're at the team facility. Is that really what we're trying to legislate out right now? Is that really what the NFL is trying to keep an eye on? To be honest with you, they would probably be more trying to keep an eye on the NFL related stuff, but I can understand it from the NFL's perspective. They want zero implications of the idea that their players, who are the product that people are ultimately gambling on, they themselves are gambling on anything entirely. So if they're at the team facility, which is an NFL property, which the NFL properties are taking money from these gambling institutions, they don't want any semblance of a gray area. And so I can understand that's why the rules in place. And the rules are the rules. Jameson Williams violated the rules. You got to get suspended for them. Now, should we have a conversation about potentially changing the rule? That's fine. Jamie says, I never defend the NFL, but am I the only one that doesn't see the issue with the NFL accepting betting money and their reasoning? Insider trading is insider trading, whether it's stocks or gambling. Now, I think the, quote, betting at team facilities is ticky-tack, and I don't love that. But if you're betting on the NFL as an NFL player, you have to know that's wrong. I agree 100%. I agree 1,000%. If you are an NFL player and you are caught betting on NFL games like Calvin Ridley was and what is being alleged here against Isaiah Rodgers, that's on you. But I also think that it's also on leadership. Because if you have players that are 7, 9, 10-year vets that have been in the league a long time, they've gone through cycles where rules get changed and things are different. And they probably have been in meetings and they've been in those, big lecture halls where those things are addressed to them. How is this stuff not addressed on a yearly basis with an NFLPA rep, with NFL leadership, with team leadership, outlining, discussing, going through these things and telling players what they can and can't do. Eugene says the NFL needs to revisit the betting policy. We'll see if something comes of this where there'll be a restructure of the betting policy. Bailey, I agree. Betting on the NFL as an NFL player shouldn't be allowed. The NFL taking money from these gambling places shouldn't have anything to do with it. Other sports in facilities makes no sense. And I think that's the divide here. I don't think we need a policy to say that it would be common sense to say that NFL players shouldn't be betting on the games that they're participating in, right? And so that's really the issue that I have here. Jamie, there's no excuse for betting on the NFL as an NFL player, especially after Ridley. I'm open to discuss the facility thing for betting on other stuff, but Rodgers, Ridley don't get my sympathy. Agree 100%. I think there's a clear distinction between what Jamison Williams, Stanley Berryhill got suspended for, and what Calvin Ridley got suspended for, and what Isaiah Rodgers is potentially being investigated for. I think there's a clear difference between those two things. And I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had of, should we really be suspending players 6 games for what Jamison Williams and Stanley Berryhill did? I think that's a legitimate conversation for us to have. But to say that the gambling policy and the NFL, and the NFL is in the wrong here for what they're doing by taking gambling dollars, and then you have players getting suspended, I'm sorry, but you need to have the common sense to not bet on NFL games if you are an NFL player. And if that is what, that's what's being alleged of Isaiah Rodgers, if ultimately the NFL's investigation comes to show that that's exactly what Isaiah Rodgers did while an active player, I don't see him ever playing football again. I do not see a scenario where the NFL lets him back on the field again. They're taking in all these dollars. There's a PR part of this as well, but there's also a common sense part of it. Bailey says, Chris, it's common sense. That's not on the NFL leadership as much. Here's where it is on NFL leadership, though. And I agree with you that it's common sense. At the end of the day, a player, these are grown adults. They're responsible for their own behavior, right? I agree 100% that there's common sense. But if you're the NFL, you're taking millions of dollars, millions, from these gambling institutions, from the FanDuels, the DraftKings, the Caesars, the BetMGMs, all of these places. You are taking in millions of dollars from these places to sponsor you in various ways. You don't think it would be kind of wise as NFL leadership, because this is a PR thing more than it is anything else. You don't think it would be wise as NFL leadership to every year go in and reinforce this if it's such a big deal, if it's such a big priority, where you're suspending people for 6 games for just betting on other sports while at the team facility? If it's such a big deal, right? And I agree that it's a big deal. If it is a big deal, then NFL leadership needs to treat it like a big deal, and they should re-emphasize, go over the top. Because while it is common sense, we now have 2 examples in the last 2+ seasons, 3 years, in which there have been major violations of this rule, and you've got a story in which players who maybe would never get caught doing it because maybe they're not into sports gambling, but you have veteran players saying, I have no idea what the rules are. That's on NFL leadership. That's on NFLPA leadership. To me, that needs to happen. And I think Jamie's latest comment that I'm going to read is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. He shortened it into a couple of sentences of what I was just trying to say. The NFL should educate more simply because this is a bad look for the league, even if it's only in the news because they're punishing players. Any whiff of impropriety is bad for the league. That is where the NFL has failed here. That is the problem. It is common sense on the players to not bet on NFL games. Agree 100%. But it is such a big deal when this stuff gets in the news. I mean, think about it. You've got subreddits. You've got the NBA subreddit, to just go to a completely different sport here. You've got the NBA subreddit finding burner accounts of a referee that now has the NBA investigating said referee about potential calls that referee has made in games. Leagues take this stuff seriously when you've got betting implications, when you have all of this sports betting dollars that come into the mix. Tuttle says that the player agents need to step up as well. I agree. This has been a failure across the board of the NFLPA to educate their players, the NFL leadership to emphasize how important it is to educate the players on this, the agents to make sure their players know what's going on, the players themselves, each individual team leadership in 32 leagues. Now, is this some, existential crisis? Is this a thing that is, permeating throughout the league right now? No. But every time we think this type of story dies down, we learn that the NFL's investigating somebody else. Isn't the NFL reportedly currently investigating another Lions player in connection to some gambling policy violations. Sam asks who has more investigative power, the NFL or Reddit. Reddit's pretty good. But you understand the point that I'm making is like this stuff becomes important. Leagues are going to launch investigations into this kind of stuff, especially when they are in bed shaking hands, taking dollars with these people, with these institutions. And so where I have a problem with it is if it's going to be such a big deal, where these are the level of punishments that you're going to put down, there needs to be a level of accountability and responsibility from the league, from the PA, from these teams to educate their players on it. Al Bundy says it won't hurt the league at all. The NFL is far too much of a juggernaut to be affected negatively by this. This is just a sports talk issue more than an issue to the NFL. Their business will be unaffected by it like the way talking heads think it will be. I mean, Al, I'm not making, I don't think I've said, we've been going for almost 18 minutes now in the podcast version of the show. I have not once said that this will hurt their business. I have not once said that this is going to hurt the league. I'm just talking about this from the league perspective from PR. Now, I'll tell you, do we think this problem is going to go away anytime soon? Do we think that everybody thought Calvin Ridley would be the end of this? That after Calvin Ridley got suspended for a year, that nobody else would get caught or nobody else would do this and that this would stop. Since then, we've had now 2 major instances and potentially the Isaiah Rodgers case, if what the reported investigation is pertaining to ends up being true, it's bigger than Calvin Ridley. It's a bigger infraction than Calvin Ridley because it would be betting on games in which he was playing in potentially. And so for me, now the business probably won't be unaffected, but Al, I can see a scenario where if the league can't show that everything's above board and that there's impropriety, do these maybe gambling organizations not spend as much money the next go around? Do they maybe spend their money elsewhere? Certainly a possibility. Again, do I think it's going to be a huge financial hit? Do I think it's going to be a huge PR hit? I don't think so. But it is a big deal. And the longer that this goes on without potentially changes to the league's gambling policy or education further on the league's gambling policy, and the more stuff that this is going to come out, it's a problem. Matt says the Lions have now lost all faith with the NFL on this and will assume no central assistance. They're going to run their own. They're going to be running their own workshops to avoid this happening again because teams can't afford to lose these guys this way. Right, and that's where the teams can step up. Heldy says, I've always been against leagues partnering with gambling organizations anyway, so any fallout from this is deserved in my opinion. Now, yeah, again, you are always going to put yourself in this box as a sports league when you take money from these gambling institutions, right? Because if you thought it was, if you woke up today and thought, man, Isaiah Rodgers only started sports betting after the league started taking the gambling dollars, you would be foolish, right? This guy's probably been sports betting for a pretty long time, right? There are players that are probably betting now that are, are betting on other sports or, betting in the offseason on things when they're away from the team facility, betting on, baseball in the summer or whatever the case may be, that have been betting for an extended period of time. So they've been doing this for a while. So it's not solely related, but that's what the leagues have to warn against. That's what the leagues are protecting against. This insider trading kind of narrative. At least it's just on a fundamental level, I don't think it's right. Yeah, I mean, Jamie says former high school Bodog Bovada bettors like myself. I mean, that's the kind of point that I'm making is if you don't think players have been betting offshore, or they've got a guy that they've been betting with on other things but before this, I think you're foolish. And I think that's why the league had to put their gambling policy in place to protect against this, because they need this to look right. They need this to look like they are doing everything in their power to be a league that is above board and it doesn't have any impropriety. And so that to me is kind of the big takeaway here is I think you're going to see a strong push for the NFL, the NFLPA to re-emphasize these rules, to go through them again, to allow players to ask questions. There was a quote, I know I read it in the pre-show. I don't think I read it here during the actual show. There was a quote here that I'll read that I think shows you that there might be more to come here. This is a quote. I'm going to try to source the person who read the quote, and then we'll get out of here on a Tuesday. This is from the Athletic story. In fact, this is from the Athletic story that I referenced earlier. And so now I have the story, and I'm going to get the quote here for you. Okay, I've got it. Both agents said that since the April suspensions, they have heard from players confessing they now know they violated the league gambling policy. Quote, I have a player who has said to me, I bet from the facility $3 or $5 bets on other sports, end quote, said the second veteran agent who asked for and was granted anonymity so that his client could not be identified. Quote, he said, what do I do? I said, quote, don't volunteer anything, but if somebody asks you, you have to be honest. They likely have evidence. So if you don't think that there are more players than that have been already suspended or are being investigated for this stuff, there is an example for you of it not being the case. Now, in this Athletic story, one of the questions that they asked the players was, has your team done more to educate you on the policy since the April suspension, since the Jameson Williams and Stanley Berryhill suspensions? I will read to you some of these player responses. One player said yes. The head coach said that there was another investigation. Another player said they put like informative sheets in our locker. They just cleared up the rules, and that may have come from the PA. I didn't really look at it. I don't sports bet, so it didn't have any relevance to me. Another player said my position coach said something, and another player said they definitely clarified it a lot more with the material that they gave us. Everything was pretty much the same from last year. They just made a bigger deal with the whole gambling thing in general. They threw out some examples out there and said they can track the platforms, like track logins and locations, so you get caught digitally now. And so you've got players saying that since the April suspensions, there's been a little bit more. A positional coach saying something, some pamphlets being handed out. But to me, I don't think that's enough, because clearly there's more stuff that's been going on here since we've started. And so I think that you are going to see workshops be held, summits be held, whatever they're going to call this. And you're going to see NFL leadership. You're going to see NFLPA leadership. You're going to see team leadership throughout training camp at all 32 teams reinforcing these rules. They might start going to camps now, right? Mandatory mini camps have already started. I wonder if the league's not putting something together where they're going to be going to all these different places to reinforce this. But for the NFL, this is a bad look. Does it hurt the bottom line? No, probably not. But it is a very, very bad look, and I think there's going to be a reaction to it, and I think there needs to be. There needs to be something that's done. And we're going to give Bailey the last word on this before we get out of here. He says, Calvin Ridley got suspended for a year for betting. That should have made others read the rules. Agree 100%. Agree 100%. Players at the end of the day are ultimately responsible for their own behavior. And if there's somebody that is going to be, if they're a player that knows they like to sports bet, then they should absolutely have checked the rules after what happened with Calvin Ridley to make sure they weren't put in a situation where they were even potentially going to be investigated for violating the gambling policy. And so for me, it's a common sense thing, but there can be some reinforcements from leadership that can help out here to help maybe mitigate this and help tone down at least the number of investigations that the NFL has to do here to be able to look into this, because you don't want this to continue to be an issue. The NFL does not want to have to keep opening investigations into players potentially violating the gambling policy every 3, 4, 5 months. That's not a good look for the league. And ultimately, over time, I think that would hurt if there was a number of them that continued to come out. But if they're able to get this under wraps and it can go away, then no, I don't think this will be a bad look and will hurt the league long term. A bit of a news edition of the show here today. We're getting back to the positional rankings tomorrow. We've got offensive linemen on tomorrow's show. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to us in the podcast feed, we greatly do appreciate it. Please share the show with a friend, coworker, loved one, somebody you think they would enjoy this football talk each and every day. We would greatly appreciate it as we continue to grow before the start of the 2023 college and pro seasons and the 2024 draft cycle. We've got a lot of fun things planned for this show over the next couple of months. We're having fun throughout the summertime, but we're going to have so much fun during the season. We would love for you to be on board. We'd love you to get some more people on board to continue to grow this show. If you're watching us over on the YouTube side of things, please give the video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. You can join us on the YouTube feed Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go live over on the YouTube side of things. You can always catch us on demand as well. We've got an entire TDN Daily playlist ready for you with all of these shows that we do. So you can go back and catch the backlog if you want to see the video version as well. And then you get to be a part of the post show if you join the live version as well, which we're going to get into here in just a second. So I appreciate everybody making this show a part of their day. Hope everybody has a great rest of their Tuesday. We'll see you all tomorrow. All right, into the post show. Jamie says 2 Browns players were robbed at gunpoint by 6 masked men. A team source confirmed the 2 players were Greg Newsome and Perrion Winfrey. Neither were harmed during the incident. I saw that story this morning. Glad that they are both okay. Glad that they are both okay. That is very, very scary. Heldy out here slandering Matt Ryan. Thoughts on the golf, Chris? Everyone else has a thought. Yeah, I'll share my thoughts on the PGA Tour Live Golf merger, and I won't get into the political sports washing side of this, but I will just give you what my immediate thoughts were. For all of the players that declined to go to the Live Golf Tour and declined all of that money and declined the big payday and declined all that stuff, they got thrown under the bus today by the PGA Tour. Jay Monahan threw them completely under the bus. And so those are the players who I feel the most for, because they're the players that defended the league. They're the players that defended what the PGA were doing. They were the ones that kind of went out of their way to defend the PGA going to battle with Liv. And they couldn't even get apparently a heads up that this was happening. They got completely thrown under the bus. And so those are the players that I feel the most for. I don't know. What does this look like? I mean, you're merging the 2 leagues. You know, at first I thought it was a face-saving move by Liv, but they're going to invest a ton more money. Like, I think they're going to invest like billions of dollars into this new venture. And so it doesn't feel like they're going to give up on it. And so is the PGA going to adopt some of the Live style formats? I didn't hate the Live style formats. I'm a big team guy. I love match play. The President's Cup, the Ryder Cup are some of my favorite events on the golf calendar because I love the team aspect. I love the match play stuff, match play team aspect of golf where you put together squads and you compete. Like the Ryder Cup is probably my favorite golf event. So I love that stuff. So if they could, if that comes out of this, if they do more match play style events, if they do more team style events, that would be really, really cool. And I think that would be really, really interesting. But that's just a personal take for me of what I would like to see out of golf. But I wanted that out of golf before Live was even a thing. I wanted more match play and more team style things. So, but yeah, they threw those players completely under the bus. Jamie's sending me DMs on my other screen about the golf that I'm not going to read on the air. Bailey says they got absolutely screwed by their own guys. As someone who follows the Premier League with teams like Man City, Newcastle, and soon to be Man United, it's becoming harder to take a stand. I mean, Bailey, yeah, I'm a Premier League fan. Trust me, I see what's going on. I see how it's playing out. It was just a quote. It was just a quote from a former president. That's all I'll say, Bailey. That's how I'll phrase it. It was about the PGA Tour and it was about Live, but you can see it. I mean, it's an old tweet. I don't even know. This is Jamie being Jamie, like finding a Twitter take from 2022, from a year ago, literally almost a year ago. And the take ended up being incorrect, by the way. But yeah, anything else we want to talk about from a football perspective? Am I really gonna read this? Jamie put the arrows. That felt like an endorsement for me to be able to read didn't Rory just step away for a little bit, Bailey? Didn't he just step away? Yeah, it is my show. I'm gonna pass on reading the quote. We'll pass. Anything else from a football perspective that we would like to discuss? We will move on from our PGA Tour Live Golf conversation. The NFL announced the ticket prices for the games in Frankfurt. We've got why do you love the Texans wide receivers? Yeah, I knew that was coming in. We've got offensive linemen tomorrow on the show. We're ranking. It is Julius Brent's season, or more than likely it's going to be Julius Brent's season, Jamie. Yeah, I didn't really want to sneak that into the show because it felt like it was not fair to the topic at hand. But this clearly is going to clear the path. How am I ranking them again? I am going to rank them based on the starting 5, the starting group. And I know that's not how we've been doing the other lists. But it feels so difficult to try to factor in 32 offensive linemen for every team. So we're just looking at starting 5. Now, when we do defensive linemen, we'll go to depth because guys will get rotated in. And that's easier to quantify. With a starting offensive line, those are the 5. So that's what we're gonna go with. But yeah, Julius Brents being the CB1 for the Indianapolis Colts feels to be a lock at this juncture. I'm not, guys. I had the Houston Texans wide receiver core ranked 23rd. 24th. I had them 24th. Did not have them that high. I will tell you, I got to use my rankings on the Prospects and Props show. Cheap plug for that show that is going to come out a little bit later today. We start going into deep diving. We start deep diving into, words are hard sometimes, deep diving into Jamie's fantasy football projections for 2023. We started with the quarterbacks 40 through 16 on today's show. That's going to get released in a couple of hours. It's available in the podcast feed right now, but if you want to see the video version of the show, it'll premiere on YouTube in a couple of hours. So we did 40 through 16. We went through that. We've got the top 15 here today. Or we're recording today for tomorrow's show, and then we've got sleepers the remainder of the week. So if you're looking to start your fantasy football research, if you are looking to get yourself prepared for fantasy football season, the next couple weeks of shows are going to be for you over on the Prospects and Props podcast as we go into some of that stuff. Because Jamie did his projections for all the players, now we're getting into his rankings, and this obviously impacts props because of how he feels about those players, and we obviously are sneaking in some talk about some of these rookies. I think on today's show we discussed CJ and Bryce. Bailey, in terms of the TDN fantasy leagues, would that be redraft or dynasty? I think, Bailey, if we did promotion and relegation, I think we would need to do redraft, in my personal opinion. Because I think if we did promotion and relegation with dynasty, I think it would be very, very difficult for people. It would be impossible because then the people who get promoted from the other league, if we did promotion and relegation, what would they do? Like they can't take their team with them. So I think it would need to be redraft. There's no way for it to work with Dynasty. Al says, I can't watch your 12 p.m. show. Something about pre-recorded shows don't interest me as much as the live chat shows. I understand that. There's some people who like the live format where they can hear me react to. Yes, Jamie? Guy says in all caps, Chris. And now knows I have to say yes, and then I have to wait for him to respond. Now we're just going to sit here. We're just going to wait. Because Jamie's completely... Did you see the Samantha Rivera stiff arm on live TV last night? I did see it this morning. Now I have a question for the group on this. By the way, 10 out of 10 stiff arm. Like an A+ stiff arm. I don't think you could do that any better considering the circumstances. Does she curse? Because I heard it a couple of times. It sounds like she curses. And I know she's doing a live TV hit. But it sounds like she says something F off or something. Like it sounds like she curses. But I know she's doing a live TV hit, so I don't think she did. But it sounds like she's like, not today or something like that with the F-bomb in there. That's what it sounded like. But I did see the stiff arm, yes. It was elite. It was an elite stiff arm. 10 out of 10 State Farm. Ah, we're getting videos of Brees Hall doing stuff at Jets camp. Yeah, Jamie's listening again now. Again, I don't think she does because again, it's a live TV hit. But on the first listen, that's what I heard. See you, Bailey. Appreciate you being here. See you tomorrow for O-line. No cursing, Jamie says. Okay, no cursing. Good to know. Good to know. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here on this edition of TDN Daily. We get back into the positional rankings on tomorrow's show with offensive linemen, like we mentioned. We will go 1 through 32. We will have a debate. We will have that conversation. Should be a lot of fun. I appreciate everybody making this show a part of their day. Appreciate everybody being here for the show. And we will talk to you all tomorrow.